Hello everyone, thank you for coming tonight. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Steve Magoon, I'm Community Development Planning Director and Assistant Town Manager for the town. Wanted to welcome you all here tonight. Thank you for coming out. I know we've got a lot going on in town these days and a lot of meetings, and they're all important, but we really appreciate you coming out to talk about various issues. And tonight we're talking about the bicycle and pedestrian plan. So what I'm going to do is just give you a brief introduction and then turn it over to our consultants, McMahon and Associates, to talk a little bit more about various things we're going to go over tonight, and most importantly, get your input back to us. So a couple of things that I just wanted to overview. Tonight, obviously, we're talking about bicycle and pedestrian circulation in town. It's an important opportunity, for us to talk about that, for you all to weigh in and give us your opinions. So much of transportation infrastructure historically has been centered around vehicular traffic, and accommodating cars and buses and trucks. Tonight, what we really want to talk about is bicycle and pedestrians. All of us are pedestrians, a lot of us are bicyclists, and providing appropriate accommodations for those two modes of transportation are equally important. It's something we really want to focus on and do some planning for. We have done comprehensive planning as it relates to bicycle and pedestrian amenities, but it's been a long time, and it is somewhat out of date and something we need to bring up to date. And that's important for a lot of reasons. One, it's important because when there are opportunities to take advantage of creating those facilities and creating those connections in town, having a plan in place where we know where the priorities are, we know where the missing links are, is really important in order to take advantage of that. It's also important as we plan our projects, or we plan our capital infrastructure projects. When we're doing road projects, or we're doing pathway projects, or we're doing sidewalk projects, to have a sense of and have provided that forethought to where we need those connections, where we need facilities, and maybe where we don't need them, where we don't want to encourage people necessarily to walk or to bicycle. So it's important to have those things in mind as we move forward. Obviously, it's also important when we have opportunities for grants and things of that nature, funding sources that we can also put to work and put into place. And probably most importantly, I think, is it's also important because it helps us identify where the really critical missing links are. It's one thing to be able to create a good facility to either walk or bicycle in a portion of town, and maybe that works great. But if it then leads to some place where there's absolutely no accommodation, and you want to get to some place that's on the other side of that, then that's really not very helpful. So, understanding, identifying where those missing links are that are really critical to creating a network is also very important and part of what we're going to try to do today, or through this process. We've been busy getting data, information together. McMahon's going to lead you through some of that tonight, and then again, most importantly, we want to get your input on what you think are some of the important things that we should be considering. So make sure you take advantage of this opportunity, take advantage of providing us with your thoughts and your input so that we can make this plan most effective. So with that, I will turn it over to Laura. Laura Weiner, our Senior Transportation Planner. I also did want to note that we do have one elected official here tonight, Carolyn Bays, City Councilor, who's joined us. So again, here to hear what you have to say as well. So with that, Laura. Senator Brownsburger as well. Always an advocate for bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Thank you.
As Steve said, I'm Laura Weiner. I'm Senior Transportation Planner for the town. I work in the Department of Community Development and Planning. Our vision is to improve walking and bicycling in Watertown, both for recreational purposes, but also for commuting, for getting to school, for going shopping and out to eat, doing errands, entertainment, to make it so easy and comfortable and enjoyable for you to walk or bike in Watertown that you'll choose to do that instead of driving. There are many advantages to walking and biking. It reduces congestion on the roads, it doesn't degrade the air quality, and it's also good for personal health. The purpose of the meeting is twofold. One is for us to tell you what we're working on and to present some data that we've started to collect about biking and walking. But we also want to hear from you. We want to know what you want from this plan. And we also want to know where you think that there are problems that need addressing. There's two different ways that you can give us that input, both by, of course, talking with us, but there's a map under issues and opportunities where you can actually mark on the map areas that are of concern. And there's also postcards around at all the different stations. If you have a particular concern, please write it down and hand it either to one of the people manning the stations, or you can really hand it to almost anybody who's either on the Bike and Ped Committee or the staff. The team that's working on the plan includes the Department of Public Works. Matt Schumann, who's the town engineer, is here tonight. Kevin Duffy, the project engineer, is also working on the project. For Community Development and Planning, Steve Lagoon, the director, Gideon Schreiber, senior planner, and myself are working on the plan. And the Bike Ped Committee, which most of the members are here tonight, they're sort of floating around. They'll be helping at the stations as well. I don't know if people want to stand up or raise your hand or something. The Bike Ped Committee, are you handy? Great. Thank you very much for coming. And they've really kind of led the charge on getting this funded and moving. The town has joined forces with McMahon and Associates, which is an experienced consulting firm of engineers and planners, and they've worked on plans in Boston, Cambridge, and Waltham. It's important to mention also that this process builds off a previous planning process called Complete Streets. A complete street is a street that works for all users: walkers, bikers, transit riders, people with disabilities, and cars. About 2 to 3 years ago, the town went through a process of soliciting suggestions for improvements for projects under the Complete Streets program. We applied to the state for some funding. We got funding for 3 projects that are all will be improvements for bicyclists and pedestrians. And Mike Pompilli is going to talk about those projects in detail during his presentation. Thank you all for coming, and now I'm going to turn over the microphone to McMahon and Associates, Christy Avicella. Thank you.
Good evening. We're going to talk for about 20 minutes just to give you an overview of what the consultant team has been working on with the town staff and the Bike and Ped Committee, going through the plans and projects that you've already performed as a community, and going through existing data. So we'll walk you through that, and we'll invite you to go through the boards. Some of you saw ahead of time. Anybody with a name tag printed on here are town staff, or they're part of the consultant team or part of the committee. So grab any one of us if you have questions. You'll also see that there are these comment cards at the station. If you feel like something else that you want to send in to us or more information, it also gives you a link to a survey that Laura mentioned as well. There's an online survey that will be available for the next couple of weeks. There's a QR code if you want to scan it and do it on your phone. We also have tablets here if you'd like to do it that way. But all of the information that you give us tonight will all be captured in a similar way, but we wanted to make sure that people that couldn't be here tonight still have a way to give their input. So if you know of friends, neighbors, coworkers, people who would be interested in commenting, please share that information with them so that we can capture the input that's received from everybody tonight. So what is this bicycle and pedestrian plan that we're talking about? Steve and Laura talked a bit about what it is intended to do and looking at how people are moving about your community, where those links may be. What we as the consultant team so far have done is gone through your existing network and those prior projects that have been done, and we're starting to identify and prioritize some of those new improvements or connections that need to be made, and that you'll see in some of the maps. We really want to know, how do you get to the places you want to be, and what would make you walk or bike if you're not already? What would encourage you to do it one more day per week than you are now? What would it take for your children to walk or bike to school if you felt safer that way? Where do we need to start considering some of those links? And then develop these measurable goals so that when the plan is done and the consultants are gone, how do you know if you've been successful? So we want to make sure that we understand what your goals are for your community and have those measurements so that when we wrap up the plan with an implementation strategy for short, medium, and long term, you have a way of knowing, did we reach our goals, and at what point do we revisit this? And finally, it will also help in prioritizing areas for different goals. If you are going to be reconstructing a street as part of your general upkeep and maintenance, if that's part of the ped bike plan that shows that an improvement is needed there, this plan helps allow that to be included in your capital projects. So we're about midway through the project so far as a consultant team. You can see we started in September in talking about the engagement process of when we would come out to meet with all of you. At what point would we have enough information to make this worth your time to come out? And assessing those existing conditions. So right now, we're here in this imagine, vision, goals, opportunities, and constraints. That's a lot of sort of planning speak to say, we want to hear from you. We want to know where we go from here. What's most important and where do we prioritize these improvements for your plan? And then we'll move into some draft recommendations and next steps. We'll have another public meeting to present that information to you. And then we'll wrap up the plan over the spring and summer and use all of this information to move ahead. So there are a few consultants here on our team tonight that will walk you through some of this. We're going to have Mike Pompelli, who will talk about some of the related projects in Complete Streets, that foundation, because we want you to understand we've seen some of the information that's already been done. So we want you to come away learning something tonight about what's already been done in your community and helping us build on that. And Natalie Rafel is going to talk about what the stations are and what we're hoping to get from each of those stations. And then we'll wrap up with any general Q&A type of things. If you have procedural questions or what is this plan about or questions that for the whole audience. And then we'll have breakout sessions that you can take your time to go through there and talk with members of the project team. We're not going to reconvene at the end of that, so feel free to stay as long as you would like and get information that's done, and we'll anticipate wrapping up by 8:15 overall. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Thanks. So our planning process builds on work that's been done as part of a number of other plans that have been completed in the town, including the bicycle transportation plan done prior to this that was completed in 2003, the parking management plan that was recently completed, a couple walk and bike assessments by Mass Bike and Walk Boston, and as Laura mentioned earlier, the Complete Streets prioritization plan, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail. We're also looking at this in the context of other ongoing planning projects and ongoing planning studies and upcoming major construction projects, including the Watertown Community Path, which will connect the Cambridge-Watertown Greenway to the Pleasant Street corridor and the Charles River, which is currently completed along Arsenal Street from School Street to Irving, as well as a short piece on Howard. The reconstruction of Mount Auburn Street from Patton Street to the Cambridge City line, which will add double buffered bike lanes to part of the Mount Auburn Street corridor. This project has funding from federal government and the state, with construction anticipated to start in the spring of 2022. The Watertown Cambridge Greenway extension, which will extend the Greenway from Arlington Street to Fresh Pond, which is currently under construction. The Watertown Square Improvements Project, which of course is a key node for all users in town, which is currently in the planning process. And then across the Charles River, the intersection of Galen Street at Watertown Street and Nonantum Road, which is a MassDOT safety project, which is currently in design, with construction anticipated to start in spring of 2023. The reconstruction of Main Street, which is again in the planning process with the town, which would involved Main Street from Waverly Avenue to Town Hall, and would add bike lanes to reconstruct sidewalks along that corridor. The annual road program, the town every year puts money toward reconstructing streets and sidewalks throughout the town. There have been 7 miles of roadway reconstructed since 2015. As part of the road program, wheelchair ramps and sidewalks are reconstructed, and bike lanes or shared lane markings are added where they're feasible. And the Complete Streets Prioritization Plan, which, as Laura mentioned before, was completed in May of 2018, had a very extensive public involvement process where over 100 projects were identified and 24 were accepted by the town council to put on a 5-year capital plan for complete streets improvements throughout the town. The town also applied for and got funding from MassDOT for 3 such projects. Crosswalk improvements along Watertown Street at Stop and Shop and Thornton Park, construction of a raised crosswalk on Lawrence Street at Cummins School, and construction of a raised crossing on Woods Avenue for the community path. So where do we go from here? What's next? We're going to build on the public input and the recommendations that were developed through the Complete Streets Prioritization Plan process, and focus on expanding safe and connected bicycle and pedestrian networks for everyone in town. So as part of this planning process, continuing from the Complete Streets planning process, we want to identify missing links in the network for bicycles and pedestrians, look at an expanded toolbox of treatments that we can use to complete those missing links and make accommodations safer, and develop an implementation plan for actually getting this done. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Natalie to talk about the existing conditions.
So as Mike said, I'm Natalie. I'm a transportation planner at McMahon Associates. As you heard previously, we have 5 stations set up for you along the wall to your right here. So I'm going to go through the content that you'll find at each station, just in a brief overview. So what I'm giving right now is the broader main themes that are at each station, and then you can look further into the details and ask us more in-depth questions while you go through each one. So Station 1 focuses on looking at the existing conditions of what exists in Watertown currently for walking and biking facilities and travel trends. So we look at mobility in Watertown generally just to understand how are people getting around today. What we can see from census data on mode to work is that 65% of Watertown residents currently drive alone to work. This is actually relatively good compared to surrounding communities. It's lower than that in Belmont, Waltham, and Newton. And so as you can see, also up here to your right, there is 1 in 4 of Watertown's residents currently use a sustainable mode of transportation to get to work. So that includes a combination of public transportation, carpool, walking, and biking. So overall, Watertown is doing pretty well in terms of sustainable transportation, but the number of people who actually walk and bike to work is pretty average compared to surrounding communities. You can see it's only 2 out of 100 and 3 out of 100 residents who are biking or walking. So we really want to think about how can we increase the mode share of walkers and bikers through creating safer networks. So another piece of information we looked at were where people who live and work in Watertown, where people who live in Watertown work and where people who work in Watertown live. And so from looking at this data, we see that almost 20% of people who live in Watertown work within Watertown. And this provides a lot of insight because Watertown is a relatively small community. It's potentially feasible for those trips to be converted to walking and biking trips if there are safe, connected networks that people feel comfortable using to get to work. And so overall, with this number of 20% of people who live in Watertown working in Watertown, that could equate to up to 4,000 trips that could be captured through walking and biking if all of those are converted.
Per month, per week, per year?
This is just the overall percentage from the...
You said 4,000 trips.
Oh, 4,000 trips.
Is that in a week, in a month, in a year?
That's just based on the number of people who work in Watertown, and if 20% of them walk their bike. But we can talk more about that at the station to help clarify. So another piece of data that we looked at to understand current travel patterns is Lime Bike data. Watertown was part of the MAPC, that's the Metropolitan Area Planning Council's pilot program for dockless bike share through Lime Bike. And they released data on usage from when the program started in 2018 to September 2019. And so from this data, we see that 17,600 trips were taken within Watertown. And that's pretty average compared to the other 15 participating communities. But 70% of those trips that started in Watertown also ended in Watertown. So this shows us that there's a demand for short local trips. And so we want to focus on filling in network gaps that would exist for these shorter trips. And lastly, when we look at where these trips occurred, the most popular route was along the Charles River Path, which makes sense because it's separated from traffic and probably provides a high level of safety and comfort for riders. But there were also a high number of trips on major routes like Main Street, Arsenal Street, and Mount Auburn Street. So this shows us the importance of providing on-road facilities for bikers to create connections, more direct connections to the places that people are trying to go. So another aspect of existing conditions we looked at was the actual infrastructure on the ground today. By looking at the town's pavement management program, we could understand sidewalk conditions throughout town. We have this mapped at the board at Station 1, but in general, we found that major corridors were more likely to have sidewalks in fair or good condition, while the more local neighborhood roads had sidewalks in poorer condition. And poor condition is generally characterized by a lack of curbing, uneven sidewalk, cracking in the pavement. So those roads would be more in need of sidewalk improvements. And then as far as bicycle facilities, the majority of existing facilities on the ground today provide mobility in an east-west direction through town. So if you think about it, that would be the Charles River Bike Path, Arsenal Street, Community Path. So there really is a need, we are seeing a need for improved north-south connections. So the last element we have under existing conditions is safety and looking at crash data. So up here we have the total number of crashes that were reported in the state's crash data portal from 2016 to 2019. But what's really important, and we have on the map at the station, is looking at the identified high crash locations, because those are based on crash rates and signify a location's priority in terms of the entire region. And so the locations that made that list in terms of having the most number and most severe crashes for the region were at Watertown Square and Village Square for pedestrians, and then Main Street from the Town Hall to Watertown Square for bicyclists. Some of the other priority locations to look at for safety in terms of bicycle and pedestrian crashes are listed here. These are the corridors that have the highest number of crashes. And so some major findings we saw from these crashes are, the one that probably pops out to you is that there were 3 fatal injuries and they all occurred along Watertown Street. Other major findings are that the majority of pedestrian crashes on Arsenal Street and Main Street were for pedestrians crossing at marked crosswalks. So that may show us that there's a need for a crossing treatment beyond just regular marked crosswalk. And then another piece is that on Arlington Street, the bicycle crashes, one involved a bus and another involved a parked vehicle. So that shows that there might be a need to consider how bicycle facilities interact with buses and parked cars to provide an additional level of safety. And lastly, for crashes, we just have here summarized all of the crashes in that 3-year period by crash severity. So again, we can see that there were 5% of pedestrian crashes resulted in a fatality all along Watertown Street, and then 83% of pedestrian crashes resulted in an injury, while 89% of bicycle crashes resulted in an injury. So overall, we just want to emphasize that there's no number of crashes that's considered acceptable or good for a community. We really want to strive for no crashes or as least as possible. It's important to think about safety holistically. So it's not just about providing a bicycle facility or a sidewalk, but thinking about how traffic can be slowed down through other traffic calming measures and increasing the visibility of pedestrians and bikers for drivers.
Road crashes that you're referring to with vehicles, or were there some bicycles crashing into pedestrians?
All of these involve vehicles.
They all involve vehicles.
So that is it for my summary of Station 1. There's a lot of information there, so feel free to go to that station after this presentation and absorb the data more closely and ask any other questions that you have. As we move into Station 2, this really focuses on the planning process and what we've collected so far in terms of feedback. So Station 2 is made up of 3 boards. The first board summarizes activities or exercises we went through with the steering committee and the bicycle and pedestrian committee, thinking about what the greatest opportunity and the greatest challenge for this plan could be, and then what a successful plan means. So the first board provides a summary of keywords that so far have been emerging out of this process. The second board summarizes feedback and recommendations from previous planning efforts in Watertown, such as the master plan, the Complete Streets Plan, and the Watertown Parking Management Plan. And then the last board is blank, and that is an opportunity for you to comment on which feedback or ideas that you've seen so far and you think are most important for us to consider in the plan. Moving on to Station 3, we are looking at issues and opportunities for walking and biking. So you'll see one map dedicated to pedestrian issues and opportunities, and these were also exercises we did with the steering committee and bicycle and pedestrian committee, where we asked them to think about where are the locations in town where you currently experience the most issues when you're walking, and then which areas do you think have the most opportunity to improve for walking. And then we did the same with biking. So there's separate maps for each mode of transportation, and then we're asking you to use 2 dot stickers to place those on the areas that you think are most in need of improvements or for us to look at in this plan. And lastly, at this station, we also have a board summarizing the existing level of bicycle traffic stress. And so the level of bicycle traffic stress is a measure that measures how safe and comfortable a rider would feel on a given roadway segment. So a level 1 is meaning that anyone would feel comfortable, from a young child biking to someone biking with their whole family, and it signifies that there would be low traffic volumes or low speeds, or it's a completely separated facility like the Charles River Path. And then we go up to a level 5, where only the most experienced biker would feel comfortable, and maybe not even comfortable, it just means they'd be willing to bike on that street. So we have this scale, and this map at the station will show you the level of traffic stress today as if you were to go out and bike right now. And so the idea is, after we develop recommendations, we'll be able to compare the existing level of stress, how it is now, to a future level of stress, and hopefully create connected networks that are mainly 1s and 2s so that everyone would feel safe and comfortable biking through town. Next at Station 4, we have our treatment toolbox. This gets at the idea that there's a range of different treatments that we can look at to provide safer facilities. So we really want to look at what we can mix and match in different types of areas and neighborhoods to create the type of network that you all give us feedback and thinking that we want. So when we think about different types of facilities, it's important to think about who we're planning for. It's not just the 30-year-old able-bodied person who's biking everywhere through town, but it's people of all ages and abilities, people with mobility impairments. It's thinking about, is this certain area somewhere that people are going to be walking or biking single file, or maybe want people to be able to ride side by side. And so these different types of users have different dimensional requirements, and we need to think about what those are while we are looking at different facility types. And also going back to Complete Streets for a minute, we know that Complete Streets toolbox, or a toolbox was started in the Complete Streets planning process. And so in this plan, we're looking to expand on the types of facilities that were recommended through that planning process and provide a greater range of options for improving the bike and pedestrian networks. And so at this station, you'll see two boards. One is devoted to different types of pedestrian facilities, and one is for different types of bicycle facilities. And each one has a description, and then a sample place of where it can be found in Watertown if it exists here today, and then also a general type of location you would use that facility. So this is really for you to start to gain some knowledge and the terminology that we use in planning and engineering to plan these types of facilities. So here's the bicycle one, so you'll be able to go up to these boards and read them in more detail there, because I know you cannot read them from here. And lastly, we have Station 5, which is more broad and starting to get at what do you really see as the vision for this plan? What is the community's vision? What types of goals and outcomes do you really want to see once this plan is implemented? So we have two boards. The first board focuses on the overall vision. And so we have several ideas and statements written up here, and we're trying to understand if there's a priority, whether you think, maybe you think they're all important, maybe you think they're all important except one is very not important. So there's no right answer. We just want to gauge what you think might be most important for this plan to address. And then our last board starts to list some of the trends that we see emerging from the data collection and from the work with the steering committee and bike ped committee that we've seen so far. And so again, we have different ideas written up here for you to tell us how important you think they are for being addressed in this plan. And then again, as was mentioned previously, we have index cards at the station in case you have an idea that you don't see listed up here. So with that, I'll just reiterate that as much as we want you to learn from the information we have for you tonight, we also really want to hear from you and where you want this plan to go. And so I will hand this back to Christy to lead the overall Q&A. And also just leave this up here if you want to reach us or have more information. We have the project website, the survey, and you can contact us through Laura Wiener at the town.
Thank you, Natalie. So that was a broad overview of all these stations. So as we move into the station part of it, start wherever you'd like. You don't need to start at station 1 and go through 1 through 5 now that you have an overview of what each one talks about. Go to whatever interests you first, and then you can make your way to other stations as you have time and interest to be able to do that. And as I mentioned, any of us with name tags are happy to answer questions at those stations. So with that, if there's broader questions that people want to talk about, I'd be happy to take those now.
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question. One of the speakers spoke about the Pleasant Street corridor. What is that specifically? Is that the sunken bike path or kind of the street sidewalk itself? What is the Pleasant Street corridor? How do you think about that?
I'm missing what?
Pleasant
Street corridor. Thank you.
So I think that was when I was discussing the community path that's going to connect to Pleasant Street, the street, and also the Charles River path behind it, both.
So it doesn't exist today.
I'm sorry?
So the corridor as vision doesn't exist today. I was just trying to understand.
Pleasant Street, I was referring to the street. It's the community path that does not connect to it now. It goes as far as Irving Street and Arsenal, and then there's a short piece on Howard Street, but eventually is intended to connect to Pleasant Street.
Any other broad questions?
I understood that there was funding to do this planning exercise, vision. I'm wondering whether or not we have identified funding to actually implement recommendations. Do you have a promise from the state or from some other?
In In some cases, I'll have Steve respond to that. In some cases, I know there is funding available for some of the projects discussed, but our intention in this plan is to lay out some of the recommendations. And if there are no funding sources or grants that could be applied for, we're hoping to be able to lay that out in the plan.
Yeah, so the question was, I was just going to do that. The question was, we've identified funds to do this plan. Has there been any identified funds for implementation? So again, there are some projects that we talked about already that already are funded. There are some projects that we talked about that aren't funded. I think one of the important things about this process is once we know and have identified some of the projects that make sense and that are a priority, then we can start talking about funding. And also take advantage of other things like ongoing capital projects the town has. If there really is a critical link that's part or in a location where we're doing a road project, then we can take advantage of that and combine the two to make that work. And also it's important that we identify priorities so that if there is something that really is a critical link and it's a real priority, then obviously that bumps up the list to try and align funding with that. But I'm sure that there will be things that we'll talk about in the plan that aren't funded, and you know, and again, we'll start to look at those and try to identify funding sources. Sure. So the question was about education enforcement, and not hearing much talked about that and how important that is in terms of educating the public about what the rules are of the road and how you accommodate or interact with bicycles and pedestrians. And that's a good point, and it's certainly something that we should talk about in terms of our plan and make sure we incorporate some discussion about that. Sure. One more.
Sort of piggybacking on the enforcement piece, I think it would help to have some visibility in the square from the police during rush hour because of the number of red lights being run. The other piece of it is snow removal. And there are, for example, again, I live on Pleasant Street, there are big sections of Pleasant Street that abut MDC. Nobody removes snow. The only way during the winter months to get to the square is to walk in the street on blind curbs. It's not just Pleasant Street. There are big parts of this town. Are we going to do anything about changing our regulations about snow removal? Because you've got people out in the street, and it is sort of a basic concept. It doesn't cost a penny.
Sure. So I'd say there's several issues there in terms of snow removal. One is DCR and what they can or can't do. We also have worked with a number of private entities to arrange for them to do snow removal in portions of some of the more critical pathways in town. We do have a commercial sidewalk shoveling ordinance. We don't have a residential requirement today. One of the things we also have talked a lot about is trying to encourage people and you know, make it clear to people how important it is to keep sidewalks clear and to help out neighbors, and you know, to do that on a more community-wide basis. But in terms of enforcement, that's not a requirement today that people shovel their residential sidewalks. And so that definitely is an issue. And no question that particularly when you get more people who do commute by bicycle or as pedestrians, you know, winter months, that can be very challenging if things aren't shoveled. And you know, obviously that's certainly an issue. To the extent we want to encourage that, we need to look at ways to address that issue as well. All right, one more, and then we're going to go to the stations. Yes, sir.
Is the possibility of snow removal on the river bike path on anybody's possible through this process to get that on the agenda, or is that not possible because that's, that's the DCR?
And I'm sorry, I missed the very first part. I understand you're talking about the river path and DCR, but what about it?
Snow removal on it.
Okay. Yeah, so again, from DCR's perspective, their budget is a challenge. They have challenges in terms of maintaining some of the facilities they have. Snow removal, certainly one of the things that, I think that they have a challenge with. And I see Senator Brownsburg wants to address this as well. But I know they have, and we have worked with some private entities to arrange for snow clearing on some of those paths where that's made sense. Senator Brownsburg?
I would challenge this city, go around for the state senator. We're after DCR constantly to have them start prioritizing paths for plowing. The way the system works with DCR is they have kind of a list of their number one priorities, which would be like Starro Drive and Memorial Drive, which they're responsible for other major roads. And then it works down to number three. Most of the pedestrian paths are in the three place, which is not necessarily what we want them, but it's sort of hard to argue with, well, Starro Drive first. If there's a lot of snow, they never get to the three. If it's a lighter snow, they'll work their way all the way down the list. So it's all about resources. We have a process, something that I put in place this year, is a review of the scope of DCR's responsibilities, because the agency really has responsibility for way too much, and the result is that they can't do it all. And so we are looking at the question of, we have the Secretary of Environmental Affairs looking at the question of, can they shed some of their responsibility so they can focus better on their park assets?
So,
Watertown do it itself.
well, there's issues with us taking on the responsibility of maintaining state property. That's a slippery slope. If we are going to take on the responsibility of maintaining state property, where does that responsibility end? Do we become responsible for that property? So I think there's a lot of issues. So it's not as simple as just saying, gosh, it would be important to have that shoveled, so the town take it on as where it is state property. But again, these are all really good points and really good conversation. I'd like to go ahead and get into the stations now, and we can get all this stuff recorded and made part of the process. So thank you all for coming and for your participation, and let's go ahead and transition to the stations, and we'll continue the conversation. Thank you.